I don't think I've ever been so interested in a PC build, only to end up so bitterly disappointed. But sadly, that is the story of today's video. And funnily enough, this all came to be because of Valve's Steam Machine. The good news is though, having spent over $1,000 of my own money on this thing, I can warn you not to do the same. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. About a month ago now, Tim and myself got together to discuss the release of the Steam Machine, and we packaged the discussion in a video titled "The Steam Machine is Impossible to Recommend," and that video very much ruffled the feathers of Valve fans. Although most of you did agree with our criticisms of the Steam Machine, there were those that defended it. And the main argument we heard was that the Steam Machine is super duper compact, and therefore a good gaming machine, despite the weak gaming performance and astronomically high asking price. It is true that at just 3.8 litres the Steam Machine's very small, and although it's based on out-of-date hardware, once destined for laptops, and it tends to run very hot, it is fairly quiet, so I guess an impressive enough achievement for such a small design. Personally though, I don't care if my home theatre gaming PC is 3.8 litres or 8 litres. Both are incredibly small and will fit comfortably, I would say, in about 99.9% of all entertainment setups or desks. I think as long as it's not a big ATX case lit up with RGB puke, it's going to suit the purpose just fine, and based on a recent poll, I think most of you agree with that. So ultimately, that's my take. Yes, the Steam Machine is small, but I also don't really care because it sucks. The performance is very weak, the hardware is already outdated, making it a hideously expensive indie gaming machine. And you're kidding yourself if you think the Steam Machine is going to be tackling AAA titles in a few years' time. I expect it'll age about as well as the Radeon RX 6500 XT. Now, in the back and forth between Steam Machine lovers and haters, seen in our comment section, as I said, there were those claiming the Steam Machine's great because of its compact size. But there were also those suggesting that its size isn't that impressive, claiming that you could build a similar sized mini ITX PC that's not only much more powerful, but also potentially cheaper. I saw a few different hardware configurations thrown around, but the one that commonly came up was the Jonsbo NV10 paired with a low-profile RTX 5060. People claimed this was about the size of the Steam Machine, while offering far better performance, and best of all, you would be able to upgrade your CPU and GPU in the future. Now, as I said, I'm not a fan of the ultra-compact mini ITX gaming PCs. I don't mind the 10-litre, 12-litre ones, I think they work quite well, but when you go below that, it becomes quite compromised. I have tried to get into the really ultra-compact ITX gaming PCs. I built a few back in the day. The concept is extremely exciting to me, not necessarily because I need or want it in my life. It's just different and kind of cool to build such a small gaming PC. And I feel this is probably the allure for most who go down this path. But sadly for me, it's always fallen short when it comes to practicality. Not only are you more limited when it comes to your choice of hardware, but the hardware itself almost always comes at a premium. But for me, the real deal breaker is just having to live with the thing. Again, the idea of an ultra-compact gaming PC, it does sound great, but that is until you live with one, and then you start to realize maybe it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Now, I know there'll be those of you watching this video that have an ultra-compact gaming PC and you love it. Hell, there are even those of you insane enough to own a gaming laptop. You freaking nut jobs, so I'm not judging. No, actually, I'm very much judging. You are legitimately insane, but I'm willing to accept and acknowledge your insanity. Basically, what I'm saying is, I know there are those of you who will watch this video on your beloved ultra-compact mini ITX PC and think that I'm wrong about all of this, but I need you to know you're the crazy one, not me. Okay, enough joking around. What I am trying to get at is, I'm sure there are those of you that recognize the good and the bad, but for you the good outweighs the bad. So an ultra-compact mini ITX gaming PC makes sense. I just don't believe that that is going to be the case for most gamers. Instead, I believe you would find yourself in an extreme minority, a niche of a niche. Bearing all of that in mind, it has been quite a few years now since I built an ITX system, and even longer since I tried my hand at an ultra-compact gaming system. So having seen all the hype around the NV10 and the RTX 5060 LP graphics cards, I thought, why not give it another shot? So being the diligent little YouTuber that I am, I set about researching the Jonsbo NV10 for the best hardware to configure it with. keeping a Steam Machine type budget in mind. There are quite a few build videos on YouTube, and I have to admit, they did get me pretty amped up for this project. I went from being semi-interested to fully committed, and before I knew it, I drained my bank account of over 1,000 Australian dollars. For this investment, I got myself the NV10 case, of course, that cost $130, then $150 for a Ryzen 5 7500F, $200 for the Gigabyte A620i AX motherboard, $315 for a single stick of 16GB of DDR5 6000 Cell 30 memory, and I'll talk about why I chose that a bit later on in the video, $260 for a 1TB SSD, $90 for the Noctua CPU cooler, and $60 for a power supply off AliExpress. The total spent so far was $1,205. I then got Gigabyte to send over a graphics card, which saved me a bit of money. They're worth $500, and I couldn't bring myself to spend $500 on an RTX 5060. But if you did, all up you'd be looking at 1,700 Australian dollars, which is a lot of money for what is a rather weak system on paper, but it's small, so there's that. Then there's the little issue of the operating system. You can either install Linux for free, but then you have to deal with GeForce drivers on Linux, so you'd probably turn to Windows 11, at least for now. And I'll let you work out how you want to source that on your own. After throwing it all together, which was a relatively quick and easy process, I was ready to fire it up, install Windows 11, configure the drivers, install the games, play the games, and test the games. During the configuration process, I did run into one extremely infuriating issue, which quite embarrassingly did catch me out for longer than it probably should have. Having fully configured the NV10 build, I started by just playing a few games, and while I was generally impressed with the FPS performance at 1440p with DLSS quality upscaling enabled, using medium to high settings in most of the games, the thing was pretty bloody hot and very loud, disappointingly so I would say. So that being the case, I decided to start tinkering. There wasn't much I could do about the 7500F. Firstly, by opting for a cheap A620 motherboard, which, to be fair, is by far the cheapest mini ITX AM5 board there is, I was quite limited in how I could tune the CPU, given this board doesn't support overclocking. In the end, the dynamic V-core option was the way to go, but my 7500F would only accept a negative 0.115 volts. Anything more than that, and I was struck down by instability. It was when I moved to undervolt the GPU that the one extremely infuriating issue popped up. While adjusting the curve, the system just powered off, as in it completely shut down, we went dark. This was very unexpected given that there was nothing that I was doing that really should have triggered such an event. At this point, the case was extremely hot to touch, so I thought perhaps a thermal threshold had been reached, shutting the system down. So I waited 10 minutes for everything to cool down and then powered it back on, only to have the system shut down again just 5 to 10 seconds after hitting the power button. So I thought, that's not good. After checking all the power cables and giving the system a quick look over, I tried again, but the same thing happened. It just powered on, powered back off. I even tried with the graphics card uninstalled, removed all the power cords and the graphics card itself, but was faced with the same result. I was pretty worn down and disappointed by this point. This build wasn't exactly working out the way I'd hoped it would, but I pushed on anyway. I decided to pull the entire system down, so basically go back to how I started, but I built it on the test bench. At that point, I did decide to just put aside the power supply that I originally started with and get a second one. I bought 2 of those power supplies. They were quite cheap and I didn't have a lot of faith in them. So I stuck in the second power supply on the test bench and voila, it powered on and loaded straight into Windows 11. So at this point, I made the assumption that the original power supply was cooked. It had some sort of failure, and then I proceeded to rebuild this PC with the backup power supply. Now, having done all of that, I powered it back on, and after 5 to 10 seconds, it powered itself back off. I sat there a bit perplexed, scratching my head for a few minutes, and then I had the light bulb moment and realized probably what was pretty obvious from the start. It was the bloody power button sticking. So the power button was being pressed in to power the PC on, but it was then getting stuck, so it was staying in the on position and therefore would turn the PC off moments later. To fix this, getting to the rear side of the power button in the NV10 with all the ATX power cables installed, which I didn't want to remove for a second time, it is somewhat of a nightmare. And in the end, the actual fix, in air quotes, if you can call it that, was to not fully tighten the screws that attach the power button PCB to the case. If you tighten the screws, as you naturally would and probably should, and more importantly, how it does come from the factory, because I didn't touch these things, they will squash the power button into the wooden facade, stopping it from working. I don't know how it worked for as long as it did, but at some point it did stop working and the system powered off and I thought something had died. So anyway, that was an amazing discovery with my brand new $130 case. Anyway, with that episode behind me, it was time to start testing. And one thing I do want you to keep in mind as we go over this data and look at the gameplay is that this hardware configuration is by no means quiet when gaming or really under any kind of load, even when undervolting the CPU and GPU. When at idle, it is pretty silent. So for watching movies or light usage, it doesn't really make too much noise. Certainly nothing you'd be able to hear sitting about a meter away. Anyway, I'll talk more about noise later on. For now, let's check out the gaming performance. Playing Forza Horizon 6 at 1440p with quality upscaling enabled with the high preset, the RTX 5060 LP averaged anywhere from 108 to 115 FPS depending on the section of game tested, while the 1% lows were seen to hover just above 80 FPS. So I'd say excellent performance overall, highly playable and very enjoyable. The problem though isn't the performance, at least not the frame rate performance, but rather it's the thermals. And let me tell you, it's also far from silent. The 7500F hit 91 degrees at a package power of roughly 62 watts. The motherboard VRM peaked at 67 degrees, which is very hot given the light load. The DDR5 memory ran at up to 62 degrees, and the SSD at 76 degrees. Then we have the GPU, which peaked at a toasty 90 degrees while consuming up to 128 watts, which saw it clocking at around 2.6 GHz. But it was the fan speed that was the real killer here. The tiny triple fans needed to spin at over 4,200 RPM to keep the RTX 5060 at 90 degrees. So not great, and it meant you could very clearly hear the PC over relatively loud game audio. So this just wasn't going to work for me. It's way too hot, but more to the point, way too loud. For me, this kind of system just doesn't make sense. I'd rather have something that's 4 times bigger that runs cool and quiet while offering at least this level of FPS performance. But I hear you small form factor guys yelling at me right now, undervolt it. So of course I did try that. With the 7500F wound down and the RTX 5060 curve optimized for efficiency, I fired up Forza once more to see what kind of difference it made. Right away, we can see that the 7500F is generally maintaining higher clock speeds, despite package power usage dropping by just 7 to 10 watts, and this reduced the peak temperature from 91 degrees down to 85 degrees. But the big change was seen when looking at the GPU, which dropped from a peak of 90 degrees down to 85 degrees, but with that the fan speed was reduced by around 30%, which did slightly reduce the operating volume. I wouldn't say significantly, but you could notice a difference, but overall the system was still very much what I would call loud. GPU power usage dropped from 127 watts down to a max of 106 watts, and this was seen despite the core clocks improving, now remaining at around 2.77 GHz, which improved overall performance by a few frames. So undervolting the CPU and GPU certainly did help, but by no means solved the issues of this NV10 build. We're talking about mild temperature and volume improvements, but overall it is still very much a hot and loud system. I did test a heap of other games using the tuned configuration and found pretty similar results. The performance was generally quite good. I mean, for an RTX 5060, it's what you'd expect. The main thing here is to avoid running over the 8GB frame buffer, so using more modest type quality settings at 1440p with upscaling can result in decent frame rates. For example, in Borderlands 4, everyone's best optimized title of 2025, it was possible to average around 80 FPS using the medium preset. So that's certainly playable and significantly better performance than what you would see from something like the Steam Machine. It's possible to average just over 60 FPS in Cyberpunk 2077 using the Ultra preset, again at 1440p with quality upscaling. Not amazing performance by any means, but pretty typical for an RTX 5060 and somewhat impressive for a 4.5 litre PC. It's just a shame that it runs so hot, and despite that is also still very loud. Horizon Forbidden West also ran well using the dialed down medium preset. You have to be careful not to exceed the VRAM buffer in this title, but the medium preset works well even at 1440p, though again we are using upscaling. Still, overall performance was good. We were seeing comfortably over 80 FPS on average, with 1% lows of over 60 FPS. Okay, so we've taken a look at how the NV10 performs with the hardware we have inside it. You've got some idea of the thermals, but I want to try and give you a better idea of just how loud it is. And obviously I can give you a dBA reading, but a lot of people that doesn't mean much to. And obviously showing the volume of something is difficult, but I'll try and show it relative to just me talking, and maybe that'll give you an idea. And I'll just show you the system in action. So the computer hasn't been on for about an hour now. It's cold. We're going to fire it up. You'll hear what it's like at idle, and then we'll get into some gaming. So I'm going to push the button, which I've fixed. Please work. There you go, clicked, and it popped back out nicely, and it's firing up. So I'll move my mic close to it. That I would describe as very quiet. Now you can certainly hear that it's on, but it's not loud. So while it's booting into Borderlands 4 and warming up, I'll just talk a bit about the performance. Again, you've seen the frame rates. Decent. It's an RTX 5060, which not particularly great, but also it does provide, a decent gaming experience, as you saw. It depends on how you want to look at it. It's not a great generational improvement over previous generations, and it's probably one of the worst value offerings in the GeForce product stack. And here in Australia, for $50 more, you can buy this graphics card, which is a compact 16GB 9060 XT. It's a faster GPU, twice as much VRAM, and it's $50. So the little 5060 in here, $500 Australian. This is $550 Australian. So while I wouldn't even necessarily build an NV10 system like this, I certainly wouldn't use the hardware that's in there if I had a choice. But there's only one LP graphics card, and that's the 5060, or at least that's the fastest LP graphics card, and there's no Radeon options, so that's also a problem. And I'm by no means an ITX hater, so I have a few ITX systems that I love. One of them is my home theater PC in the gym. This is another one. I have 3 of these, which my mates and I take on fishing trips. We like to have like a COD gaming night when we're away having a boys fishing trip, and these fit in the car nicely. We usually put RTX 5070s, 5080s in them, high-end CPUs, proper ATX power supply, and obviously this is a much bigger system than this. But it's still pretty lightweight, pretty compact, it fits everywhere, it travels with us very easily. And this is a full-blown computer, lots of performance, very cool and quiet. It functions, it's pretty much indistinguishable from a full ATX case in what it offers in terms of performance and the thermals and airflow, temperatures, the whole lot. So this is about as small as I'd recommend you go if you want a compact gaming system. Obviously much bigger than this, but I think for most people, fitting either of these near a home theater setup or a desk or whatever, it's going to be pretty easy. I get this is much bigger than that, like significantly bigger, but this is still very compact compared to like, an ATX, like look at the size of this full tower system down here. It's much smaller than that. So anyway, in terms of practicality, this is extremely practical, very compact, easy to put in the car and take away, which is what we do. So yeah, we have a few of these systems. These have been excellent for us. This, not so much. It's starting to ramp up now as well because we've loaded into Borderlands while I've been waffling away. So this is by no means full noise and full temperatures yet, but we are starting to ramp up. Now, it's not horrifically loud. Probably if you've got some speakers playing for your home theater, like gaming audio and stuff, it's not going to bother everybody. But for me, it just comes back to the fact that, do you need it to be this small? If you do, I guess this works. So we've confirmed it works. You can get reasonable frame rates. So if you require your PC to be this small, then it does work. But if you can get away with something a bit bigger, and the system I showed, you don't have to go that big, like 8 liters, and you'll still get plenty of performance, reasonable thermals, quiet operating. And you can hear this is getting louder and louder now. So it's still ramping up. It's not at full volume yet. You can see temperatures are still, we're only in the 70s for the CPU. That's going to go up about another 20 degrees. The GPU is pretty much at max temp now, and we can see the fan is spinning at about 4,200 RPM, which that's about as loud as that gets. The CPU is going to add a bit more noise shortly. So that's So that is the GPU noise over, that's relative to my voice. And that's what it sounds like from the CPU side. So we're mostly hearing the CPU fan on this side. It's a bit quieter. And then that's the system facing front on. Now, if I stand back, this is a meter from the system. And again, like, it's going to depend on how loud every speaker's turned up, but I guess this is relative to my talking voice. I've certainly heard louder computers, but it is loud, but it's not just loud, it's extremely hot. So it's only warm to touch. This gets, I would say, uncomfortably warm. So we put some K-type thermocouples on it, and the surface temperature at the top and front was 45 degrees. So the case actually kind of needs case cooling, ironically enough, but it does act as sort of a heat sink.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty loud.
Yeah, it's pretty loud.
And it's vibrating the desk as well because of how fast it's spinning.
So again, as you can see, the performance is quite good. It's very much an RTX 5060, which when I say the performance is quite good for an RTX 5060. It's to be expected, let's say. And that's the operating volume. So I'll leave it up to you guys to decide, you know, what you think of that. I don't think there's much more point digging into the performance data. The GPU, CPU performs as you'd really expect. It's more the thermals and operating volume that is the issue. And I'll just address the single channel configuration because some people might be wondering why I did that, and that's handicapping the system. But I did that to simulate a Steam Machine-like configuration because that was the initial goal of this video. And, you know, doing so would give you the opportunity to buy a second 16GB stick once DDR5 pricing improves. But for those of you concerned or wondering, this had absolutely no impact on the games that I tested in this video, as they all were very heavily GPU limited. So improving the CPU performance won't actually boost FPS performance. That said though, had I tested more CPU limited games or tested games under more CPU limited scenarios, then the single channel configuration would have likely degraded performance a bit. All of that said, my issue with this build, the reason why I wound up so bitterly disappointed, as I said at the start of the video, is because it's just not practical, at least not in my opinion. The thing's just way too hot and loud, and because of its incredibly small size, you are very limited in your choice of hardware, which also limits your potential upgrade options. I'm not really sure what I was expecting. The entire system stock sucked down around 275 watts from the wall. That is a lot of power to dissipate in such a tiny case. And even when undervolting, it consumed 225 watts. That's an almost 20% reduction, but even so, it was still hot and loud. Perhaps if you're into these super small form factor builds, you just accept that they're going to be hotter and louder than an ATX build or a larger mini ITX build. I'm not really sure, but all the content I watched really led me to believe that this would turn out a lot better than it has, but maybe that's on me. That said, I'm not alone, having been so disappointed with the results. I almost convinced myself that there was something wrong here, perhaps I'd done something wrong. So I started looking for other people who had followed these build guides or just decided to create their own NV10 build, and it didn't take me too long to find people complaining about how poorly the build had turned out with very similar thoughts to myself. This person, for example, built using the Gigabyte B650i-AX with a Ryzen 5 9600X, and the same RTX 5060 LP graphics card that I used. And despite creating his own custom exhaust mod for the graphics card using Noctua fans, he too was suffering from excessively high thermals. Disappointed with the results, he expressed disappointment with his decision to go with the NV10 and felt his only option now was to seek a better case. He didn't really seem all that fussed with the noise, so again, perhaps this is something you're just willing to accept when going this small. But if you really want a compact, quiet gaming PC, this thing ain't it. You're going to have to look in the 10 to 12 litre range, where you'll be able to fit a better graphics card, because these triple fan, low profile graphics cards, they are very loud, so I would recommend avoiding them at all costs. But even if this build was cool and quiet, that would make it certainly a lot better, but I don't think I'd recommend you build it unless you absolutely need a tiny PC. And it's for the same reasons why I wouldn't recommend wasting your money on the Steam Machine. Again, unless you absolutely, for some reason, have to have a gaming PC that's that small. I think for most other people, a larger mini ITX or micro ATX system is going to be much more suitable, and that would be my recommendation, because this doesn't severely limit your choice of hardware and future upgrade options. So for those of you who have been toying with the idea of building your own 4 to 5 litre game PC, I do hope this video was helpful. And I really would urge you to reconsider and instead go with a 10 to 12 litre build in one of the many excellent cases that you can get within that range. And that is going to do it for this video. I do have some more mini PC, Steam machine type competitor builds in the works with slightly bigger cases that should lead to much better results with more powerful graphics cards that are much better value than this one. So subscribe for that if you're interested in more of this sort of content. And yeah, I'm excited to start exploring the world of mini PCs. Yeah, that's really going to do it for this one. If you want more Hardware Unboxed goodness, we do have the join button or Patreon. Signing up to either one of those will give you access to our exclusive Discord server. You can get on there and tell me about your experiences building compact PCs and maybe point me in the direction of some content that I should look at making around this sort of stuff. We also do live streams, behind the scenes content, Q&A stuff. So yeah, check that out if you're interested. If not, that's perfectly fine. And of course, I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.